Come on, get your cockles. Je voudrais. Yeah, what's that? Les petits manger. Breakfast, is it? Deux billets. 2 tickets, s'il vous plaît. Anytime, governor. Come again. Down and out in Paris and London. The podcast. Okay, chapter 21 then. We start off with another time marker, as we'd expect. This life went on for about a fortnight, so we get this sense of time progressing. There is a forward motion in this narrative, which of course there has to be, and you could compare that with Thunder, certainly, where there was a sense of always looking for something, a sense of always those narrative hooks. Each chapter would often lead to another person, wouldn't it, that would then be interviewed in the next chapter. And there isn't quite that same sort of anadiplosis in here, whereas, what I mean by that is in Thunder you'd have the name of a person, a Stasi man or whatever it might be, a person who worked, or a person who was in East Germany, at the end of one chapter, and the next chapter would then be titled that person's name. So there was an anadiplosis in the way in which those chapters were arranged. We don't have that here because it's not as investigative. But what we do have is these time markers to give us that forward motion of just the endurance, really, of putting up with this kind of work. It's more of an endurance in one fixed place rather than the moving around that Thunder does in hers, and the sort of constant talk of train journeys here and there and travels and things that she sees. Okay, chapter 21 then, let's push on with this one.
This life went on for about a fortnight, with a slight increase of work as more customers came to the restaurant. I could have saved an hour a day by taking a room near the restaurant, but it seemed impossible to find time to change lodgings, or for that matter to get my hair cut, look at a newspaper, or even undress completely.
Slight asymptotic list there, ending with a bit of bathos. In fact, it's triadic structure, isn't it? Haircut, look at a newspaper, or even undress completely. But it's bathos at the end of that triadic structure, because it's sort of ridiculous that, okay, he hasn't got time to get his haircut or look at a newspaper, but to even not be able to undress properly is surprising. So the bathos there is designed, I think, to enhance that sense of how difficult the work was and how hard it is to live in that style.
After 10 days, I managed to find a free quarter of an hour and wrote to my friend B in London, asking him if he could get me a job of some sort, anything, so long as it allowed more than 5 hours sleep. I was simply not equal to going on with a 17-hour day, though there are plenty of people who think nothing of it. When one is overworked, it is a good cure for self-pity to think of the thousands of people in Paris restaurants who work such hours and will go on doing it, not for a few weeks, but for years. There was a girl in a bistro near my hotel who worked from 7 in the morning till midnight for a whole year, only sitting down to her meals. I remember once asking her to come to a dance, and she laughed and said that she had not been further than the street corner for several months. She was consumptive and died about the time I left Paris. After only a week, we were all neurasthenic with fatigue, except Jules, who skulked persistently. The quarrels, intermittent at first, had now become continuous. For hours one would keep up a drizzle of useless nagging, rising into storms of abuse every few minutes.
That metaphor there, drizzle, is sort of a very fitting metaphor for the catering industry, isn't it? You might drizzle. What is to drizzle? Olive oil tends to get drizzled a lot, doesn't it? Jus gets drizzled a lot. But here it's the nagging that's being drizzled. You could also, at a stretch, you could say it was that sort of drawing on pathetic fallacy, the idea of, sort of drizzling rain has that sort of sombre feel and the darkening of the mood, which is certainly the case in the kitchen here as well.
"Get me down that saucepan, idiot," the cook would cry. She was not tall enough to reach the shelves where the saucepans were kept. "Get it down yourself, you old whore," I would answer. Such remarks seemed to be generated spontaneously from the air of the kitchen. We quarrelled over things of inconceivable pettiness.
Just a thought there then. I mean, obviously he's ashamed of speaking that way, and he sort of justifies it or reflects on it by saying that such remarks seem to be generated spontaneously from the air of the kitchen, as if just by being in the kitchen, it sort of invited that way of speaking. And there's probably situations you can think of yourself when, if you're in certain environments, certain words come to mind more than others. And there's certain environments where different set of, I suppose it's a dialect to an extent as well, isn't it? Sort of certain dialects can be called up if you're in certain, along with certain people or in certain environments. And clearly that it's a place of taboo words and oaths and swear words and insults and all the rest of it. But he clearly seems ashamed to have to print what he's written because he has to. He sort of does justify it. We don't get that in Funda. No, we don't get her being as horrible as that either. So there's no need for her to self-justify or apologise or make excuses for. But we do have that here because he's so much more a part of this world. He immerses himself in this world in the way that Funda doesn't really. She interviews them. She at times interrogates them. The nearest we get is her drinking with Klaus. That's the nearest we sort of get to her dropping her guard really and becoming one of them, whereas he is one of them.
The dustbin, for instance, was an unending source of quarrels, whether it should be put where I wanted it, which was in the cook's way, or where she wanted it, which was between me and the sink. Once she nagged and nagged until at last, in pure spite, I lifted the dustbin up and put it out in the middle of the floor, where she was bound to trip over it. "Now, you cow," I said, "move it yourself."
So more insults here, more zoomorphic insults too. We're surprised. I think we're surprised, aren't we, that our narrator here is stooping as low as this. But he explains that this is the kind of effect that fatigue has upon one's manners. I know what he means. There is a certain fatigue in distance learning, isn't there? Although clearly not the same as working in a kitchen, and hopefully I'm not going to start hurling abuse at anybody. Although you never know. There's always time.
Poor old woman. It was too heavy for her to lift, and she sat down, put her head on the table, and burst out crying, and I jeered at her. This is the kind of effect that fatigue has upon one's manners. After a few days, the cook had ceased talking about Tolstoy and her artistic nature, and she and I were not on speaking terms except for the purposes of work, and Boris and Jules were not on speaking terms, and neither of them was on speaking terms with the cook. Even Boris and I were barely on speaking terms. We had agreed beforehand that the engueulade of working hours did not count between times, but we had called each other things too bad to be forgotten, and besides, there were no between times. Jules grew lazier and lazier, and he stole food constantly from a sense of duty, he said. He called the rest of us jeunes, blackleg.
So this is an insult. You may not have heard of this phrase blackleg, but it's used to refer to people who break a picket line or a strike. And its origins are unclear really, but I always thought it was to do with literally having black legs from coal miners often who were on strike, and then the ones who'd worked, who'd been down the mine, had black legs and sort of gave away the fact that they'd betrayed the union and actually gone to work anyway. I've had a look online to see if there's anything else. It can also refer to a bacterial infection among animals, cattle and sheep particularly. So there's a zoomorphic connection there which you could have. But again, I mean, what it does is it also shows us the rebelliousness and the corruption within the world of the catering industry at this low level. Well, and also the higher levels, but here certainly the low levels, stealing from the kitchens.
We would not join him in stealing. He had a curious, malignant spirit. He told me as a matter of pride that he had sometimes wrung a dirty dishcloth into a customer's soup before taking it in, just to be revenged upon a member of the bourgeoisie. The kitchen grew dirtier, and the rats bolder, though we trapped a few of them. Looking round that filthy room, with raw meat lying among the refuse on the floor, and cold, clotted saucepans sprawling everywhere, and the sink blocked and coated with grease, I used to wonder whether there could be a restaurant in the world as bad as ours.
So just backing up a little bit here, the kitchen grew dirtier and the rats bolder. Is it zeugma? A little bit, is it? Certainly incrementum, isn't it? Things growing dirtier and bolder. I think at a push you could say there was a little bit of zeugma as well there. That it grew dirtier and the rats grew bolder. I suppose there's a parallelism at least, if not zoigma. And then you've got this list of the chaos and the filth, the raw meat, the cold clotted saucepans, the sink blocked and coated with grease. Good grief! Can you imagine it? I hope restaurant kitchens aren't really like that. It does make you wonder, doesn't it? I mean, I'm quite enjoying eating in at the moment. I'm obviously haven't been out for months, and it's fine. I don't actually miss going out for meals as much as I thought I would do, or going out at all. Generally, I've been quite happy at home. But it does make you wonder about the cleanliness of certain hotels and restaurants.
But the other three all said that they'd been in dirtier places. Jules took a positive pleasure in seeing things dirty. In the afternoon, when he had not much to do, he used to stand in the kitchen doorway jeering at us for working too hard. "Fool! Why do you wash that plate? Wipe it on your trousers. Who cares about the customers? They don't know what's going on. What is restaurant work? You are carving a chicken and it falls on the floor, you apologize, you bow, you go out, and in 5 minutes you come back by another door with the same chicken. That is restaurant work," etc. And strange to say, in spite of all this filth and incompetence, the Auberge de Géant-Cotard was actually a success. For the first few days all our customers were Russians, friends of the patron, and these were followed by Americans and other foreigners, no Frenchmen. Then one night there was tremendous excitement because our first Frenchman had arrived. For a moment our quarrels were forgotten, and we all united in the effort to serve a good dinner. Boris tiptoed into the kitchen, jerked his thumb over his shoulder, and whispered conspiratorially, "Shh! Attention! Un Français!" A moment later the patron's wife came and whispered, "Attention! Un Français! See that he gets a double portion of all vegetables." While the Frenchman ate, the patron's wife stood behind the grill of the kitchen door and watched the expression of his face. Next night, the Frenchman came back with 2 other Frenchmen. This meant that we were earning a good name. The surest sign of a bad restaurant is to be frequented only by foreigners. Probably part of the reason for our success was that the patron, with the sole gleam of sense he had shown in fitting out the restaurant, had bought very sharp table knives. Sharp knives, of course, are the secret of a successful restaurant. I am glad that this happened, for it destroyed one of my illusions, namely, the idea that Frenchmen know good food when they see it. Or perhaps we were a fairly good restaurant by Paris standards, in which case the bad ones must be past imagining.
Litotes there at the end. A little bit of litotes. The bad ones must be past imagining. I mean, this is the fact that if this is a good restaurant by Paris standards, the others must be much worse, must be awful. So there's sort of, it's kind of backhanded compliment, isn't it? If this is a good restaurant that's only relatively good, it's sort of litotes. Again, it's never a perfect example. It's very rare we find perfect examples of anything, but we're scratching around trying to find what we can here, aren't we? I've written bathos there. Why have I written bathos? Bear with me. Oh yeah, the sharp knives being the secret of a successful restaurant. It's that sort of bathos, isn't it? That actually the most important thing is not the quality of the food, apparently. It's the sharpness of the knives, the sharpness of the cutlery, which seems so absurd and ridiculous, and yet there's presumably some truth in it, because that's what he's seen. So it just seems bathos. It's surprising for us because we'd expect it to be something more noble than just the sharpness of the knives. Good grief, so many noises and beeps and whistles. It's enough to drive someone insane.
In a very few days after I had written to B, he replied to say that there was a job he could get for me. It was to look after a congenital imbecile, which sounded a splendid rest cure after the auberge de Géant-Cotard. I pictured myself loafing in the country lanes, knocking thistle heads off with my stick, feeding on roast lamb and treacle tart, and sleeping 10 hours a night in sheets smelling of lavender. B sent me a fiver to pay my passage and get my clothes out of pawn, and as soon as the money arrived I gave 1 day's notice and left the restaurant. My leaving so suddenly embarrassed the patron, for as usual he was penniless, and he had to pay my wages 30 francs short. However, he stood me a glass of Courvoisier 48 brandy, and I think he felt that this made up the difference. They engaged a Czech, a thoroughly competent plongeur, in my place, and the poor old cook was sacked a few weeks later. Afterwards I heard that, with 2 first-rate people in the kitchen, the plongeur's work had been cut down to 15 hours a day. Below that, no one could have cut it, short of modernizing the kitchen.
And there we go. End of chapter 21. 2 chapters left then of the Parisian section, and we'll pick it up again with chapter 22, with a bit more self-justifying sort of humility, I suppose, in chapter 22. So I'll see you again for that one, if I can find the right buttons to stop. Bye.